let's start it this way. Let's take it easy. How have you enjoyed the World Cup this year so far? And what have been some of the highlights for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just been this enormous split screen event. I mean, like always, the football delivers. And I feel like this tournament, it's really delivered. I mean, the run of Cape Verde was absolutely phenomenal. I see you're wearing an Egypt jersey. I mean, that was a lot of fun as
Yeah.
well. I happen to be wearing a Bosnia jersey. A hell of a run for Bosnia. I mean, we both knew, though, that the football would deliver because the football always delivers. And on the flip side, boy, there's been a lot of the kind of stuff that you and I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is to say the intersection of politics and sports has been in your face. I mean, the sort of rescinded red card heard round the world. I honestly feel like that's one of those moments that's going to go down in World Cup history. It was huge. And it's funny when, sometimes when you're living a moment, it's hard to know if it's going to end up in history, but certainly that one. I mean, just like extreme corruption,
Mhm.
or at least the appearance of corruption for all the lawyers listening between Donald Trump and FIFA and his buddy Gianni Infantino. So, I mean, it was a split screen event, but I guess I kind of always knew it would be in a certain sense. And my line in the sand this year, and I don't know what yours was, but mine was I was not going to spend a single penny on a ticket because I didn't want to give a single penny to FIFA. So I didn't attend any matches. I did watch many matches with friends, and I don't think FIFA can deprive us of that opportunity. And I also, when I've been in Toronto, and I went to the stadium outside where there were protests, and I was following and trying to learn from the protesters there. So I've been around stadiums on game day, but I haven't been in the stadium myself for that experience. What about
I
you?
al I also haven't, bought any tickets. So originally, I expected that I was going to be, attending as media, and then I actually didn't end up taking any media obligations because I've been working on my book, and I just knew I'd be traveling a lot, and I had deadlines for my final sort of edits that were going to be due around the same time as I would have been covering these events. So
Mm,
I had to pick, and I ended up picking the book. I'm still glad I picked the book, but since you mentioned Egypt, I did have a bit of FOMO not being able to attend some of Egypt's historic games. I mean, Egypt had never won a World Cup game ever. And then they did in Vancouver, and they were out celebrating in the streets with everybody. I at least got to go and see those celebrations and see Egyptians take over a Canadian city for a change. So it was just
mm,
delightful in that sense. But I absolutely had no intention of buying tickets and supporting FIFA, especially with these dynamic pricing
mm.
schemes that they're running right now. It's just absolutely, utterly ridiculous. But here's the thing, this split screen you're talking about, we always knew this was going to be the case. I much like you did. I know I saw you do a whole bunch of media ahead of the World Cup, and I did a bunch as well. And one of the questions I'd always get asked is, how is Trump going to get away with this World Cup? He's so unpopular. The World Cup and FIFA is so unpopular. People are calling this a joyless event.
Mhm.
I mean, there was a lot of negativity surrounding the event when ahead of its start, and yet my response was always the same, which was, all that's going to change once the first whistle blows and the ball starts getting kicked around the pitch, and we start seeing the actual football, and that takes over. There's something truly. Uh, Powerful about the sport and potent in its ability to really distract from everything around us.
Mhm.
And I'm not 100% sure many things can do it on this level. I mean, I've watched multiple cities now this World Cup just come alive, and people are actually truly happy. And in many ways, they're distracted. You sit and have conversations with friends now. The first thing that comes up is, what was the score? What do you think about this? Nobody's talking about the fact that there's still a war going on. The United States and Iran are still at war, but that's not making headlines the way it did. It
Mm,
feels like we all enter this global bubble with
mm,
football. And
mm.
it's truly, I mean, coming back to your book here, which talks a lot about sports washing, it really feels like the perfect example of sports washing. Because if it's about distracting from human rights abuses, I mean, what better example than the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting now to return to the idea of sports washing, which, as you noted, is sort of the core concept that ripples through my book, Red Card. And I just want to acknowledge at the outset, there are a lot of people that approach the concept of sports washing with healthy skepticism, people who I very much admire. And
I'm
I
one
think
of them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of the reason why a lot of people don't like the idea is because it's been wielded in such an ethnocentric, if not xenophobic way in the past. And what I mean is, you know, those countries over there engage in sports washing, but we consider ourselves to be a democracy and we don't engage in sports washing is sort of the implicit idea
Mhm.
there. And I think that you can understand what's been happening so far. We still have a World Cup final where President Trump is on schedule to show up and give out the trophy. So anything could basically happen there, especially if the heads of state from Argentina and Spain show up. A lot of political dynamics go in play. But it's been an interesting and pleasant, quite frankly, surprise that Homeland Security hasn't sent in Immigration and Customs Enforcement to the stadiums where they've been doing operations. That was one of our big fears, was that was going to happen. But to your point about deflection, meanwhile, far away from the stadiums where all the journalists have gone from around the world, the actual number of ICE detentions has increased. So during a pocket toward the end of June, so right in the thick of the World Cup, ICE was averaging more than 2,000 detentions a day. Now, I know that's not quite Stephen Miller's white nationalist fever dream of 3,000 a day, but that is a lot more than usual. And you wouldn't necessarily know it from the coverage because it was happening so far away. And I do think that a lot of people, and maybe including myself, were more distracted by the World Cup. And so Trump basically, got away with that, even when they're killing people in the streets. I mean, you would think that might draw more attention. So my point is just this. They did deflect attention from this stuff, even though we all knew it was going to be happening and continuing on a certain level, because they did it away from the stadiums. So I think you can understand a lot about how President Trump has used, and his administration has used this to sports wash if you think about audience, because one of the sand traps, if you will, of sports washing is that when people ask, does it work? What they mean is, does it work on an international audience? Does the person who's doing the sports washing, whether it's Vladimir Putin, the Emir of Qatar, or Donald Trump, are they helping their cause in the international realm? Like people go, oh, actually, that guy's not so bad after all. That was never the plan with Donald Trump. I think his actions already made that very clear. He does not care what Africa thinks. He does not care what Asia thinks. He doesn't care what Europe thinks. He doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks. But what he does care about is what his domestic supporters think. And if you read that as the way of interpreting a lot of the things that have happened, it makes a lot more sense and shows that he is a sports wash. And let me give an example, if I might. Omar Abdul Qadir Artan, the storied referee from Somalia who was denied entry and then interrogated for an extremely long period of time and then sent away, must have been horrifying for him. Um, he's a Somali guy. We're all like, what? That's not in the spirit of the event. That's ridiculous. For Trump, it's red meat for his base.
Mhm.
He's been talking about how people from Somalia are trash. I'm quoting him, garbage. And this just is of a piece with that. He's sending a message to his supporters ahead of this important midterm election that don't worry, I haven't strayed from course. What about that rescinded red card heard around the world where he basically, from his perspective and the perspective of his supporters, it shows that Trump's a strongman who will bend the will of these globalist institutions like FIFA, and they'll basically do whatever he wants. And that, again, helps his domestic base. Or what about when the Department of Homeland Security issued these wholly racist anti-immigrant tweets having to do with the U.S. national team's success, and they were linking it to these phrases that sounded a whole lot like Nazi phraseology, and we've had experts weigh in and say, and yeah, it was. It looks exactly like the kind of phrasing that Nazis used during World War II. So all of that is what I'm trying to say is all of that is directed toward a domestic base and trying to fire them up ahead of the midterm election and keep them on sides, if you will. So I do think we've seen sports washing, maybe not in the exact ways we anticipated, but in ways that matter very much for a domestic audience.
Honestly, I think the struggle is always going to be with the term itself. I think, unfortunately, we're talking about such complex and nuanced issues, and the way you just broke that down is a perfect understanding of how Trump would utilize something like sports washing. But I think the term itself, lends us to these sort of disagreements constantly over what it means and how it's applied. And I'm very glad that you did mention that this type of soft power use from the World Cup and other mega events is universal. It is a global thing that's not just authoritarian specific. Pretty much every country that has ever hosted the World Cup has done so with the intention of using it for soft power. Now, that might not be as terrifying in some countries and in some examples as others, but that doesn't mean that the intent behind it isn't there. And yes, with Donald Trump, it absolutely was about appealing to that domestic audience. What do you think, for instance, about the handling of Iran and and the really the mistreatment of the Iranian national team at the World Cup?
It was an absolute travesty on so many levels, the way the Trump administration treated Iran. First of all, to state the obvious, it is not exactly in the spirit of FIFA's slogan, football unites the world. I mean, it's almost the exact opposite of that mentality. I mean, having them travel after matches, get right back on the plane and travel to Tijuana was very difficult, and it made their World Cup quite a challenge in a lot of ways. And I was personally disappointed to see them eliminated after all they went through, only to miss out at the very end. Is must have been very difficult for the team. I mean, it doesn't surprise me the way Trump treated them, but it also doesn't surprise me the way that they weaponized it. You know, Department of Homeland Security head Mark Mullen, afterwards, he said he was doing a happy dance when Iran was eliminated. It's like, who does that? It's just like the sort of cruelty streak of MAGA coming through the vector of sport.
I'll
And
say this. Sorry to interrupt you, Jules. I'll say this when you're asking about who does this with regards to Mark Wayne Mullen. Well, I unfortunately have done quite a bit of reporting on him over the past decade in the world of mixed martial arts because he himself was a former MMA fighter, and his probably the most infamous thing he was once upon a time he was actually trying to help fighters by trying to help them unionize and create sort of uh, acts in Congress that matched the Muhammad Ali Boxing Act that would protect MMA fighters. So he actually was trying to do some good at one point. But what he became really known for was starting a fight with a Teamster Union member on the Congress floor. And it was actually Bernie Sanders who had to break it up and call them children. So that's actually the kind of person we're talking about here. So it really did not surprise me at all that that was his comment on Iran. But anyway, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you.
no, that's really important, and it shows again how for the Trump administration, sports really matters. I mean, when Trump picked Mark Wayne Mullen for the job, he actually talked about how he was an MMA fighter.
Mhm.
Hyped that up. I mean, the administration used sports more than any other administration in recent history. I do want to say one thing on the flip side of Iran. I mean, out of that exclusion and brutal cruelty from the Trump administration came a loving embrace from the people of Tijuana. And just to see the relationship that was forged there between the people of Iran and the people of Mexico was really special. And I don't want to lose sight of that reality for the World Cup. It happened in places in the United States too, like where, for
Mhm.
example, in Lawrence, Kansas, where the Algerian team was based, and how Lawrence just wrapped their arms around Algeria and their fans. And normally I would just say, yeah, that's kind of what happens with the World Cup. But I think it actually held an extra bit of poignancy as well as an extra bit of political importance in this moment, because while the headlines are always Trump does this, excludes that, says this racist thing, that racist thing, it was an opportunity for everyday people to say, you know what, not the entire country can be distilled down to this cruel brand of MAGA. We like it when people come to our country. Please, we want to learn about your culture. We want to learn, we want to know who you are. So I actually thought it was both beautiful and important in this political moment, what we saw in numerous cities in all three of the countries.
So you actually, and this is actually lovely to hear. But so you're saying that because I've seen some articles about this saying that the World Cup's been an opportunity for America to re-examine and rediscover itself. This is speaking to Americans, saying that hey, you've lived these culture wars, this political polarization for so long. You hate half the country, and yet here you are. Surrounded by people having fun, dancing on the streets, picking people up and throwing them around. It was a rediscovery in that sense. And I wonder sometimes, maybe because I'm cynical on this type of reporting that I do, whether this is a romanticized notion. But I get the sense that you're telling me goes beyond that, that this is really sort of the type of that football can help us find what's human in each other again.
Absolutely. I know. I definitely feel that that is the beauty of sports in general, and certainly the most popular sport in football. And oh, I can put on my political science hat for just a second to say
Mhm.
that, you know, we're not actually as polarized as we think in the United States. The media are polarized in the United States. Now we basically have a right wing and a left wing media. I'm not equating them in any kind of
Mhm.
but I'm just saying they exist. We definitely have like a very polarized political culture inside of elected officials in Washington, D.C. But if you look at the issues themselves, even very hot button issues like abortion, there's actually not that much difference from everyday people who are polled on these issues. And in fact, sometimes the polling surprises a lot of people, like the recent shift in the United States. More people are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause now than they are to what Israel's doing to Palestinians. Like the people are not as polarized as our elected officials and media would lead us to believe. And I think the World Cup gave yet one more opportunity to remind the world of that. You know, we can't just be hyper polarized. We do actually appreciate the world out at large.
So should the US host the World Cup again? I think there's an option to do so, I think in 12 years, is it? The 2038 edition, if I'm not mistaken, can only be hosted by either Oceania or North America. So I think there's going to be an opening there. Is this the kind of event that could help sort of us emerge from these bubbles that we occupy all the time? I wonder.
If they were bidding today, absolutely not. The United States does not World Cup.
Yeah.
Pretty basic, you know, in terms of just like basic standards of decency, as well as FIFA statutes that are in place that should basically exclude the United States based on all the human rights violations, all the political interference. You know, I was talking before about
Mhm.
President Trump engaging in, you know, I would call it political interference when a government official weighs in on a red card. You know, when other countries engaged in political interference, whether it was Kenya, Pakistan, Chad, you name it, they were suspended for engaging in political interference when it came to the
Mhm.
matters of FIFA. Trump was actually rewarded for it and got what he wanted. And so with that kind of track record, absolutely not. You should be giving it to other places only if they want it, and only, in my opinion, if they have a democratic referendum where everyday people who will never be able to afford a ticket to the World Cup still have a chance to weigh in as to whether they want to spend their tax dollars on hosting it.
That's an excellent point, honestly, and fair one. I keep thinking to myself that we should not have even been in a situation where the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Olympic Games would have been hosted in the Trump regime to begin with. He
Mm,
should had he had two consecutive terms or just one term and he was gone, we would not have been in this position to begin with. So sometimes it's even hard to predict what's coming down the path.
yeah.
What starts is, I mean, and this is not. I mean, this is not unique to Donald Trump. The 1978 World Cup was held in, an Argentina that was run by a military junta. But when it was awarded to Argentina, there was no military junta at the time. So I fear that stability doesn't exist. And in some ways, this is my overall criticism about mega events is that we've reached a point of no return. They are so big that in some way they are corrupting to whichever country hosts them, whether it's democratic or authoritarian. Can events of this size and of this demand on resources uh, and on basic rights actually survive, and can it be beneficial to us and to a country overall and its government?
You know, I totally agree with you that these mega events are only getting more mega. And when you were talking, I was like, it kind of reminds me of like, you know, we used to have VIPs and now we have VVIPs. It's like we need a word for like the mega events because the World Cup, especially for the men now, but also increasingly for the women,
Mhm.
is just a huge event, meant more and more teams. And look, Infantino has floated the trial balloon during this World Cup of increasing the number of teams that would participate to 64 in 2030. Okay. Again, it sounds like it's kind of dealing with that paradox that I laid out before, like more inclusion. Um,
Mhm.
but my goodness, like I have to just put it out there from the perspective of climate. This World Cup in North America was an absolute nightmare. It was the most polluting World Cup in the history of the event for a number of reasons, one of which we've been talking about geographically spread out to 48 teams, more than ever, up from 32 in
Mhm.
Colorado. 4 years earlier. And then, of course, the United States has a totally crappy train system and it's huge. So, how are you going to get from Kansas City to San Francisco if you're a fan? You're not going to take the train, which would be better for the environment. You're going to fly. So, the estimate was more than 9 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent would be arriving in the atmosphere from this tournament alone. That was a low end estimate. And that was before Gianni Infantino got on his private jet and basically crisscrossed North America and reportedly took a trip to Qatar for a funeral in the middle of all of it as well and zipped back to the United States. I mean, his emissions alone are like half of England or something. Don't quote me on that, but you know what I mean? It's like an enormous amount of emissions. So I wish we were talking more about climate change in all of this in terms of how we structure these events. And you might think because of the hydration breaks that we would. I wanted to ask you actually about your take on the hydration breaks. Do you call them that, or what's your take?
Oh my god, the sheer commercialization. When I realized, because I had no idea what was going on when the World Cup first started and they were taking these hydration breaks. I'm thinking, okay, is this is this a random break because it's too hot, but it doesn't seem like it's too hot? That like I didn't quite understand that the rule had come into effect. And then when I did and I realized that it was basically an ad break, well, at first I had to just laugh because FIFA once again found a way to capitalize and profit off a legitimate concern that we're dealing with rising temperatures. Players should not be playing in these conditions and are required to take hydration breaks for their health and safety. So FIFA said, sure, you want us to forcibly do this? Well, then we're going to profit off it at the same time. It's just if this is not late stage capitalism, I don't know what is, right? Like criticism goes beyond FIFA to capitalism as a whole, to advertising, and to this incessant urge to maximize profit at the expense of absolutely, utterly everything. But honestly, I couldn't help but laugh when I was watching South Africa, Mexico, that very first game. I just couldn't help but laugh, and it was ridiculous. So yeah, that's how I felt about it.
The fans were similar to you. I mean, at these matches, you could hear the booing on television
Mhm.
when hydration break. It really is kind of galling when you think about how Gianni Infantino and FIFA say all this about how much they care about the environment. There's that notorious video where Infantino pulls out a green card for the planet and he says, "You too can help," and they plan this World Cup. It's just like obviously greenwashing in the extreme. And then to have him actually be able to benefit monetarily from it is just like the next level of galling. I mean, if he were here, he would tell us, "Oh, FIFA, we didn't benefit at all from this," but they will because now in the future they're going to keep these hydration breaks. I can't imagine they're going to get rid of them, especially in 2030, where it was scorching hot in a number of the countries that are going to be hosting in 2030. So they're going to keep these hydration breaks, and it's going to allow FIFA to go to the broadcasters when they negotiate new contracts and say, "Look, we know you're going to make more money out of the hydration break, so we're going to charge you more for the contract in the first place." So they are eventually going to make money. But of course, his little smarmy sneak around moves are usually pretty well calculated, given the fact that they spend, I just saw reported, $119 million on lawyers. So they have a phalanx of lawyers to come up with good arguments like the ones that we're talking about here. $119 million. My gosh.
Good lord. I mean, honestly, I'm not even convinced that the 48 team World Cup was that necessary. I understand the inclusion argument, but if we talk about the biggest stories that have come out of this, Cabo Verde, for instance, people just assume that Cabo Verde needed the 48 team World Cup to qualify. No, they qualified top of their group in Africa. They were going to the World Cup had it been a 32 team World Cup. That wasn't changing. Likewise with Egypt. Egypt topped its group and was heading to the World Cup anyway. No, and as a matter of fact, had it been a 32 World Cup, then we might have actually exited in the quarterfinals rather than the round of
Mm,
16.
mm,
So the story would have been even better, but that's my own personal bias there. But generally, I think a lot of these stories were happening anyway. The best ones that we were fascinated by were going to happen, whether it was the same size as the one in Qatar or if it was a 48 team World Cup. So to me, expanding to 64 is only uh, burdening countries that are going to require more resources to host these events, going to scorch our planet even further in a climate crisis, right? Like, I think nothing good is going to come from this. And I think the argument about inclusion, well, we should be restructuring the qualifiers to begin with so that it's not so heavily leaning in favor of just European teams. Like
mm.
9 out of 10 African nations that qualified for the World Cup advanced beyond the group stage. Now, the story ends there because only two made it to the round of 16 thereafter, being Egypt and Morocco, and there was a lot of really disappointing results there. But still, that initial comment is an important one. 9 out of 10 African teams
Mhm.
advanced out of the group stage. That's more than any other cohort from any other continent. So to me, that's inclusion right there. You should be pouring resources into these different confederations. You should be restructuring it so that it's much more fair and more of them get to actually compete in the World Cup, not just expand it and in many ways water it down, right? What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you make some great points about the teams that qualified at the top of their group and that were gonna be there anyways. It wasn't like some donation from FIFA that some
Mhm.
got there, and that often is the implication. One thing I wanted to ask you about that I found really interesting with the Egypt team, and especially the coach, who was very outspoken around Palestinian freedom and rights, and like dedicated one of the big
Mhm.
wins to the people of Palestine and the people of Egypt. I was wondering if well, first of all, what are your thoughts on all that? But second, Palestine is often referred to as the 49th team in this World Cup. Do you think it lived up to the expectation that you thought it would, the presence of support for Palestine, or did it not live up to kind of what your hopes might be?
I think a lot of people might have been hoping that it would look like Qatar, where in the stands there was just more Palestinian flags than there were other flags, and you'd have a Moroccan team on the pitch waving Palestinian flags. But that was in an Arabic country. That was very different context at the time. We could not have expected that to be the same in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. But in some cases, because this was a 48 team World Cup and there were more Arab teams, there was a Bosnia Herzegovina, for instance, as well, right? Like your jersey, that country and its supporters, came to support Palestine, and you could see them on the streets chanting for Palestine, waving the flag in the stands. That you get when you include more nations and they bring their concerns and their issues to the forefront, not just the ones that dominate the Western context in general, right? So I think that's really, really important. But what what makes me believe that Palestine was well represented at this event is something, one of several examples would be Hossein Hassan, Egypt's national team coach. I was blown away, honestly, because Hossein Hassan honestly has a long and interesting history as in Egypt. First of all, he's a legendary striker. He's a renowned figure in Egypt, but he's also got this fiery temper. And there's a video on the internet. It's not even hard to find of him literally chasing a photographer around the pitch who had pissed him off. Like he is that kind of person. So seeing him become so human and so emotional over Palestine, not just by waving the flag, which what had actually occurred is that he didn't have that flag himself. After the game, while he was talking to the team afterwards, as people were leaving the stands, he noticed the Palestine flag and went and asked the supporter to hand it to him. And he took it and started waving it around the pitch. So that he saw it in that moment and said, "This is something I want to do." So it was a spur of the moment human decision. To me, that tells me that it wasn't necessarily performative. He didn't expect to come to this tournament to simply promote Palestine, but that in this moment of heightened emotion, in this moment of history for Egypt, he wanted to tie that to Palestine. And that's extremely human. And also, Jules, speaks to the zeitgeist of what it is to be an Arab. Now, there's a whole philosophical, historical conversation about what even is an Arab or who takes that moniker, whether Egyptians should be calling themselves Arabs or Africans. At the end of the day, we fall into this community. And what unites this community more than anything other than language is probably solidarity for Palestine. There's very few other things, maybe a shared trauma of living under oppression and dictatorial regimes that unite us truly. But Palestine is the key issue. It's the reason why, long before on October 7th, at the Qatar World Cup, people were raising the Palestinian flag. This is not new for us. This is not a new issue. This is long standing. This is a defining feature of what it is to be Arab. When our countries were decolonizing and we were overthrowing, our Western colonial forces, like we were in Egypt in 1952 to get rid of British colonial rule. These were the issues and the mantles that we immediately latched onto. Palestine, right? The Arab countries went to war for Palestine in 1948. They were terrible in it, but they did. They couldn't. They and we can talk about how states and governments have handled Palestine over the years, and I think it's been terrible. Egypt has occupied Gaza in the past. Jordan has occupied the West Bank. So we're not heroes, we're not saviors, but the state and the citizens are very different things. And for once in that moment, Hossein Hassan wasn't representing the state. He was representing the Egyptian people. Because let me tell you, I doubt the Egyptian state would have wanted him to raise the Palestinian flag there. It's a very sensitive subject for them right now. We technically have a peace treaty with Israel, and we get paid by the United States, right? That's how our military is funded. That doesn't suggest that we're allies of Palestinians, but ask any Egyptian on the street, and they'll tell you that does not matter. We are with Palestine. And
Mm,
that's what Hossein Hassan did in that day. He spoke to that. And there's more to that story when you realize that uh, an Egyptian relief committee in Gaza was actually organizing watch parties for Palestinians in Gaza. So they were setting up, connections, bringing in screens and electricity, water supplies, all that, so that you could offer them some form of joy in such hard times. And to see the images of Palestinian kids raising a Palestinian flag and an Egyptian flag, and actually the looks of joy as they're celebrating Egypt's victories at the World Cup, like Mohamed Salah scoring the penalty, the Panenka penalty he scored, the wins, the look of joy. Me watching that as an Egyptian, it reminds me of how connected we all are. That if they can experience that moment with such happiness, then we're not as far apart as people like to think we are. And Gaza and Egypt are neighbors, truly. The people of Gaza, their form of Palestinian is very close to Egyptian. We are very, very, very close. And that was a moment that proves that to me. And
mm,
then the organizer, the primary organizer of these watch parties, he's an Egyptian as well, and is a longtime resident of Gaza. He was actually killed in an airstrike by the IDF an hour before Egypt's game against Argentina. So the IDF has since said that it was an accidental strike. They were looking to attack a Hamas militant somewhere else. At least they admitted that this was that this was uh, a, a bad strike. However you want to frame it, that they were completely and utterly wrong, which they usually don't do. I think they did because he was Egyptian and
mm.
not Palestinian, and they don't want the added geopolitical conflict. But I'm saying all this in detail, Jules, because I think it's impossible to separate that context, the political context of what Egypt was representing, from Egypt's participation in the World Cup. And a lot of that can be said about other countries and their context as well. But the politics matters here, and it mattered significantly for Egypt, right?
Mm.
I would tie it to the Folaran Balogun in this incident in some way, shape, or form here, because you brought this up several times. The feeling of massive corruption on FIFA's part. And it seemed like the whole world felt this injustice that FIFA was going to kowtow to Donald Trump to help the United States men's national team. And it felt like the whole world united behind Belgium. And I think that it's a compilation of multiple things, because it's not just a feeling of injustice towards sports, because sure, some of us who really care about sports feel that way, but I think there's something deeper. It's the feeling of injustice we're carrying over everything. The Iran war, his existence as US president to begin with, the injustice of the ICE detentions, the kidnappings and the killings. The list goes on, the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank. Like, there are so many case studies of why we feel awful right now. And it felt for a second we could personify it in Balogun, Donald Trump, and that red card incident. What do you think about that?
I love the way you're talking about it. I mean, yet another way of thinking about it is that in recent years, as everybody knows, in the United States, truth has been under fire. And a lot of that is because of the sort of right wing media ecosystem that just basically will proliferate almost any lie that Donald Trump says, and a few lies of their own. And it's so Donald Trump and the sort of MAGA movement have really sort of destabilized what is truth. And of course, that's to the benefit of them. That's a classic trick of authoritarianism, is you destabilize what truth is. Similarly, with that decision around Balagoon, with Trump's intervention, he kind of destabilized the core idea of fairness within football, which is so important. Just like truth is really important to politics, or at least I hope it is, so too is integrity when it comes to sports and fairness. And he really besmirched the integrity of the game there, and I'm concerned at the longer term effects. I was really happy to see the pushback from the Belgians. I mean, they basically mocked Trump in the locker room. And I'm sure you and your viewers and listeners know, doing the YMCA dance and the so-called Trump dance, and they did the so-called Trump dance on the field too. Like, and then posting the actual Belgian team's football team were posting these trolling tweets about overturn this and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, there was pushback on that, but I'm wondering kind of the longer term damage that this could do, especially when you lacquer on top of all that, all the issues around VAR that have upset so many people in this tournament that feel like countries have been wrong, that it takes too much time, it doesn't even get the right result a lot of the time anyways. And then the selective use of VAR. I don't have to tell that to you. I don't want to raise an issue, but I mean, if anybody watched the Egypt Argentina match, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking. So, like, what I'm saying is, football's integrity is already under fire for a lot of footballing reasons, and then you bring in Trump and his sort of standard issue, reverse Midas, anything he touches turns to crap, kind of dynamic. It's really could do damage to the sport.
It's funny that you bring those 2 things, 'cause I was hoping we'd get to a way where I could connect these 2 things, the Balogun red card, sort of FIFA's integrity issues, and the Egypt-Argentina game. I'm actually doing a piece right now that I'm finishing for The Guardian, trying to talk about sort of the proliferation of conspiracy theories at this World Cup and how it's coming about. And to me, it's not a simple case of, oh, people are just suspicious over integrity or over the red card. I think it's a combination of pretty much everything we've been talking about, from people's sense of injustice about the world around them and how they've sort of compartmentalized that into football. It is the massive integrity issues with Balogun, with FIFA in general. I mean, let's not forget there's precedent to Balogun as well in Cristiano Ronaldo. They revoked his suspension as well to ensure he would participate in the World Cup. So all of these things combined, plus, the horribly inconsistent use of VAR and what seems to also be biased use of VAR, all of this has led people to raise not just conspiracy theories, and I mean, some of them are like Zionist conspiracy theories that Israel is rigging the tournament, which I think is a little ridiculous, but even that speaks to our current reality of how people are viewing the world, and of course, the context of Israel and Gaza and what's happening, right? So people are projecting, let's say, through this World Cup. But one of the things I've really noticed across the board and across social media is all these rigged accusations for Argentina and the World Cup. And I really don't think we would have been here at this intensity with even having, this. I think it was Trevor Noah on his podcast because he's a big football fan. It's Trevor Noah having these conversations. Obviously, he's not saying the ridiculous conspiracy theories, but he's talking about how these incidents are ruining the game and ruining the integrity of the game. So I think that Rubicon you're talking about has been crossed. And it's funny that Balogun, Egypt, and Argentina, all these countries play a big role in the perception of FIFA as this corrupt entity that's basically match fixing at this point in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, at first, I can't wait to read the piece on conspiracy theories. I mean, I think always the subtext when you use the term conspiracy theory is sort of like they're not true. That, like, your oil hat industry is going to benefit from these conspiracy theories, if you will, right? But then if you think about the actual word conspiracy, when
Hmm.
people conspire, like, me, you, and a couple other people put our heads together and try to, like, strategize about what we want to actually have happen, that's not necessarily a lie. It's just kind of like people with using their power to make things happen. And that's definitely happened in this World Cup that are only going to stoke the other kind of conspiracy theories, the sort of tinfoil hat variety.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's like an interesting kind of back and forth dialectic, if you will, between the conspiracy theories and actually powerful people conspiring to make things happen that help in their direction. I mean, obviously, FIFA had a real interest in the United States doing better and better in the tournament. The broadcasters definitely had an interest because they were selling those hydration break commercials for like 3 or 4 times as much if the United States was playing over at Fox. And so
Wow.
economic interests in the United States advancing. There's no question they did. I mean, it's just like a statement of fact. But that feeds this theory that then they're going to act in ways that advantage the United States. And when you look at what Infantino did or what FIFA did, I know that the one man who apparently like made the decision on the disciplinary committee for this red card when it wasn't supposed to be just one man, that feeds exactly these dynamics that you're talking about. So things got out of control in certain respects with Infantino and FIFA in ways that, again, through conspiracy theories or just people being disgusted with the entire enterprise, could do damage to them in the long term. Not to mention the fact that, partway through the tournament, more than, dozens and dozens, like more than 70 MEPs from the European Parliament started
Mhm.
looking into a lot of the allegations that I think are correct allegations put forth by the group Fair Square, which, by the way, full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board for them, trying to
I was
say
gonna
that,
bring this up.
yeah, they basically violated their own statutes around political neutrality. FIFA did, and in particular, Gianni Infantino. And so now there's MEPs in the European Parliament who are saying enough's enough. Football needs to be actually regulated by people who are
Mhm.
independent from FIFA. I think what we've learned over the last few years from watching FIFA, and a lot of people knew this already, but that they can't regulate themselves. They won't regulate themselves, and they won't even really follow their own statutes. What I mean is, FIFA is supposed to be politically neutral. Tell me how Gianni Infantino showing up at the supposedly, the Board of Peace meetings, wearing a MAGA style red cap that says USA on the front, 45, 47 on the side, and giving the thumbs up to President Trump. Tell me how that's politically neutral. It's not, obviously. And so they're constantly he's violating their own statutes. So, yeah, since I did mention it, and sounds like you wanted to ask me about it, I will just say to your viewers and listeners that if you feel the same way, that FIFA absolutely needs a reboot, well, this campaign is called Reboot FIFA. You can go to rebootfifa.com and learn about it. And one of the goals is to have as many people, everyday people, football lovers around the world. You don't have to be a member of FIFA, member of the Parliament in Europe. Sign your name onto it and say you could become a member on what we hope to have to be the biggest class action complaint against FIFA ever, that we're not only taking to the European Parliament, as I've been saying, but also taking to the FIFA Ethics Committee, which, yes, they
Mhm.
have my dream. So, if in case your viewers didn't know that, but second, I don't think a lot's going to happen there. But we need regulation of football. It's like too valuable of a social resource in the way you've been beautifully describing.
First of all, I have signed my name to this document for everybody who's listening to this, so I highly, highly recommend you do the same as well. And second of all, shout out to Fair Square and Nick McGean. I absolutely love that organization and the work they do. They are unbelievable. Thirdly, Jules, just tell us a bit more about the overall, like, you've told us about the intention, what you're trying to do in these class action moves. I want to know what a reboot really looks like in your opinion. Is this a burn it all down and start again kind of thing? Is this reforms, or specifically making them accountable to the actual uh, ethics and the policies that they already have in place? So what does it look like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm speaking for myself now, and definitely
Mhm.
not Fair Square, even though I'm on their advisory board. And I very much feel like this is a burn it all down kind of moment. But the problem is that's just simply not going to happen in the short term. There's just no way, because of the way that the sort of FIFA clientelistic patronage network is set up. There are too many people inside of FIFA who are benefiting economically from the status quo and the way things are. To put a more specific note on it, if you're on the FIFA council, the powerful body of around 3 dozen people, you will get between $250,000 and $300,000 a year just for attending like 2 to 4 meetings. I mean, talk about an easy job. And all those people have day jobs too, where they're making, more money on the
Where
side.
where can I sign up for this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love it if you could get in on that, because, I mean, we have at least one voice that's critical in there. But that, of course, makes it so nobody really wants to change the path of FIFA, because everyone's getting a great deal out of it, not to mention all the football associations around the world that get millions upon millions of dollars given to them with very little transparency on in terms of how that money is spent, and they like the system exactly how it is as well. And so, as you covered in the wonderful podcast that you did for this World Cup, this is a system that was put in place in a slightly different form by João Havelange way back when, the great Brazilian sports leader who basically kind of led us to the Manila envelope full of cash, or maybe even suitcase full of cash era of Sepp Blatter, replete with
Mhm,
guys like Chuck Blazer, who was on in FIFA, and a big CONCACAF guy who had that $18,000 apartment for himself
mhm.
in Trump Tower, and then the $6,000 adjacent apartment for his cats every month. That was like the Blatter era. Now it's been refined by Infantino, where it's sort of like a legalized corruption, if you will. It's kind of mostly above board with like almost no transparency. And all these FAs are getting so much money, they have no inclination. So if the FIFA Council, on one hand, doesn't want to do anything because they're doing great money wise, and then these bodies, all these FAs have no intention of changing things, that's how you get to the scenario where ahead of the World Cup, you already have these bodies in Africa, Asia, elsewhere that are pledging their allegiance to Infantino when he's going to run for president in 2027 again. So my point is just that it's not going to happen from the inside. That's why it needs to happen from the outside. These are political questions. You can be regulated by political bodies where FIFA works. Just as it was a political question in Mexico not to be able to charge more money in the secondary market. If you were going to resell your ticket, you had to do it at face value. Unlike the United States, where it was a political question to engage in quote unquote dynamic pricing, which is to say extractivism orama on the behalf of FIFA and make
Mhm.
and from the ticket buyer. Just as those were political questions, the regulation of FIFA should be a political question where you have independent bodies. Now, the last part for me that I think is really important is to have everyday fans have a channel for engaging on this. And what I mean is, there's a lot of great activism at the local level in numerous clubs. I've heard you talk about the ultras in Egypt and being like a really important part of your political awakening vis-a-vis sport, and that you're not alone, and it's like a really important a part of the political culture of football is the supporter. So I would love to figure out ways of channeling the political positive energy of supporters into pushing back, because we saw what can happen when FIFA went too far and tried to create this super league, with UEFA, and fans said no, and they actually managed to stop it. I know I'm being a little bit oversimple here for the point of time, but fans should have a voice in this matter. And if we could figure out a way of like bricking it into the process in a more meaningful way, I would be entirely in favor of that, because I think it would be a great check on the power of FIFA.
I always wondered to myself, how do you talk? And this is the question I ask myself all the time. First of all these were excellent points, Jules. I always ask myself, how do you convince fans to care about these issues the way we care about these issues? Say you're not into politics, say you don't even understand politics that much, you don't care about the climate that much, or you don't see how it affects you personally at that moment. How do we reach people? And I found, or at least what I'm doing right now, and you tell me what you think about this, is I get to them on their level. I talk about the football itself, and I'll say, well, you think you're enjoying this right now, but you don't realize they're actually ruining the sport you love so dearly, right? This applies to a range of sports, but since we're talking about FIFA
Yeah.
and the changes that are going on, you did mention, how subservient a lot of the confederations have become. CAF being one of them, which is the Confederation of African Federations in like that controls African football. We've had a tournament in Africa that Egypt's won 7 times, more than anyone else, the African Cup of Nations, that Egypt helped found in 1957. And this was a, de- decolonized symbol of Africa, this tournament. It was very important to Africa. And unlike a lot of these other regional continental tournaments that happen every 4 years, like the Euros or the Copa America, the AFCON happens every 2 years. There's a reason for that. It's because African footballers generally have far less opportunities to train, both as a team and abroad. This was the structure required to ensure that there was enough scouting taking place, there was enough attention and branding and media recognition, enough money flowing through to federations and to countries hosting it in Africa that could use it. There was a lot of reasons for this that made Africa a special case. Now, recently, though, CAF has announced that after having discussions with FIFA, it has moved the tournament to a 4 year cycle and has created some other small tournament to operate in every other every biannually as well. The problem with that is that the reason that is happening is because Gianni Infantino is taking up more of the football calendar with his new massive projects, right? Whether it be expanding the World Cup, hosting a Club World Cup, right? At one point, he was talking about a biennial World Cup, right? So he wants FIFA to be all powerful, all encompassing. And that affects the football that we have all grown up with. I grew up watching the African Cup of Nations. I grew up specifically in the era where Egypt won 3 of them in a row: '06, '08, and 2010. I remember those so clearly. Those are formative parts of my childhood, my understanding, my love of the team. Football wouldn't be the same with me for me without that. And I
Hmm.
don't care how big of a World Cup they want to make. That does not take away from our events. If anything, this seems like a form of neo-colonialism operating through football right now. So Gianni Infantino is destroying football the way we love it. As another great example is the hydration breaks.
Hmm.
If you cannot stand the hydration breaks, then you have to sign your name to this reboot FIFA like initiative by Fair Square, and you have to start taking issues like this seriously, or else look no further than yourself when you want somebody to blame for what it's become.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. And the other thing, like on the practical level of signing up for the rebootfifa.com campaign, is that you get these updates every once in a while. So Nick McGeehan and the folks at Fair Square are producing content that is like keeps you up with the most recent machinations of the World Cup and how the work that they're doing, or I guess I should say we're doing, fits with that. And I have to say, I do think that we're living in an interesting moment where more people are open to blending politics with sports and feel that it actually enriches the experience when you start talking about colonialism, neo-colonialism. I mean, when Senegal plays France, for example, like how do you not talk about colonialism? It's part
Mhm.
of the and it actually enriches the discussion and it makes it an extra layer of interest. At the same time, I mean, I understand that some folks need a break from it all. I mean, this world is rough, and like sometimes you just don't want to have to deal with reality, and you just want to have your mind be able to just focus on sports. I mean, if you go back to the and like phrase from Karl Marx, the that religion was the opiate of the people. I know some people have applied it to sports, and I mean, I think there's a little bit of truth to it, but I also know that if you look back at that original passage from Marx, he meant this in a very sympathetic way to people. He said that religion was the heart in a heartless world. So he was sympathetic that people would be religious. It wasn't just like this opiate that he was totally disparaging. And similarly, I think with football, the people that want to just keep it simple, it's because this world is hard and football is the heart in their heartless world. And so kind of meeting people where they're at, but certainly, with the different models that are out there right now, I think it's a great moment to excite people and get them involved. If you can just look at the Bundesliga with its 50+1 ownership model, they don't have a lot of the problems. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but thinking differently about ownership. Could you have ownership, like public ownership of a team, not unlike the Green Bay Packers from my home state of Wisconsin, that is a publicly owned team in the NFL, where when they need capital, they don't bring in billionaires. They bring in more script, and like you can buy it. You buy a share in the Green Bay Packers for $200, and you get a little piece of paper you can put on your wall, and you're an
I
owner
had
of the.
no idea.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't know
it's
that.
totally different model, and that is why, my friend, that there's a football team in Green Bay, Wisconsin, a very small market, because they can't move it because there's no billionaire owner that's like, let's take it to Vegas or wherever they want to take it next, right?
Amazing.
My point is that you could easily take that model and you could import it into football in ways that I think would be tremendously popular. I tried to do that in Portland, Oregon, where I usually live. And I think there's actually a moment for Vancouver to have a kind of more serious discussion about this as the Vancouver owners. I mean, it's rare that you see the owners of a sport team just like publicly announce with almost pride their own incompetence. They're like, we can't make this work in any kind of way. We're so terrible at our job of being businessmen that we need all your public money to like keep us here, and basically trying to blackmail the people to give them this money. Well, hey, how about Vancouver just says, in the spirit of Avi Lewis, who's been talking about taking back and nationalizing certain things, how about we nationalize the Vancouver Whitecaps? And when they make money, if they make a profit, we funnel it back into whatever the people in Vancouver want to put it towards: homelessness in the downtown east side, or whatever issue that is democratically decided. Like, I feel like this is the moment to try that, because so many people are sick of this sort of privileged sliver of the global 1% using soccer and private equity to their advantage, but not necessarily to the community's advantage.
Speaking to that last point, the Vancouver Whitecaps owners just put forth a proposal to completely take over and run BC Place, the stadium. So that just to give you an idea of where their head is at, rather than the wonderful suggestions you're coming up with right now.
Yeah.
So the fight goes on. Unfortunately, Vancouver doesn't have a great mayor either in Ken Sims, who's absolutely using this event to sports wash his own incompetence over the past few years, right? Same with the Whitecaps, as they were doing good last year, having gotten a hold of Thomas Muller from Germany and made it to the finals of the MLS competition. He really jumped on that opportunity to sort of attach himself to the team. So, again, more examples that this happens across the board. Democratic countries, authoritarian regimes, sports are just far too potent a weapon. And you're right. I think it's a completely fair thing for people to say, you know what, this is my form of escapism. I just want to enjoy myself. I think, given how hard the world is for all of us, I'm not even just saying for you and I, for everybody, really. Uh, I think you're allowed some moments of joy, and I'll come back to Egypt again on this. That World Cup, adventure for the team brought collective joy to the people of Egypt that we have not experienced since the revolution. Now, think about that. And I wrote this for The Guardian, actually, right after the Australia game. Egypt, the last time we took to the streets chanting the way we did in the last few days was during the revolution, the 18 days of the revolution, when we overthrew Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled like a pharaoh for 30 years over Egypt. And since then, there has been almost nothing to be joyful about in the country. And it's strange for people who maybe are not big fans of sports to hear us say something like what you're telling me. You're comparing, some games at a World Cup to a revolution. I'm not exactly comparing, but I'm showing you the sheer potency of these two very different things and how they are capable of bringing us en masse in the millions to the streets to celebrate, to chant, to remember that we actually like each other. This is true about football. This is why I do believe that it has the ability to be a source of good. But I
Mhm.
also firmly believe that collective joy is one of the easiest things to co opt and weaponize. And that's what we see time and time again, Jules.
For sure. I mean, and since you're talking about Egypt with your Egypt jersey on, I would love to like finish with a story about Bosnia, which is I was living in Sarajevo for a little more than a month recently, right amid all the World Cup fever because Bosnia had qualified. There were posters of the players celebrating all around town, like big billboards, and this jersey I actually bought from in front of a mosque in Sarajevo, and you could buy them just like anywhere. And when I was in Sarajevo, I went to the Genocide Museum, and I was just walking through and looking at, carefully reading all the exhibits, and I couldn't believe how many exhibits at the Genocide Museum were related to football. There was one that was literally called "Football Saved My Life." There was another that described all these people during the 1994 World Cup huddled around a black and white television watching and cheering for Roberto Baggio, and how it brought the community together even though they were in a camp, basically a concentration camp during the siege of Sarajevo. There was another one where they wove together this soccer ball. I think they used a nylon stocking and they stuffed it and they kind of painted it so it looked like a soccer ball. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm just noticing this because I'm thinking so much about football right now and the lead into the World Cup. But maybe just soccer, football just really is one of our most powerful communal resources out there. It really truly does give hope. And that's why I really think, my friend, that it's worth fighting for. Linking arm in arm with people who are like minded to fight for a better world through football, but also for football. And I guess that's like one thing I think you and I share. And I look forward to staying in that struggle as we all move forward.
I mean, I can definitely say this easily, is that the fact that you continue to do what you do, and every time I see you, you know, giving these fantastic interviews with how eloquent you are and how clearly you make these points to everybody, does make me feel a lot less alone. I'll tell you that this is an isolating job. It's an isolating industry in many ways, and I feel a lot less alone when people like you are out there speaking.
Same. Fight back is a team sport, my friend. We got to keep fighting.
Absolutely. So, for one last time, please, everybody, this book is essential. As a matter of fact, not just this book. every single thing Jules has ever written. I've now read 3 of your books, Jules, and I love everything you do and the way you write, and I can't wait for your next one. But,
I
this has
can't
been
wait for your book coming out here soon.
well
Yeah.
I'll believe it when I see it. You know what I mean? Like, there's a pre-order link, sure, I'll believe it when I see it. Like, when I see it for the first time, then we can talk about, "Oh my god, it's real."
I
But
hear
right now, I'm just looking to take a break. But
I
I couldn't do that without talking to you first, and I'm so glad we did. It's always a pleasure, and I can't wait to see you in person again very, very soon. Until
likewise.
then, take care of yourself, and please tell everybody where they can find you and what to, expect from you moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, you can find a lot of my writings that I put at my website, which is just julesboykoff.org. I'm also on Blue Sky. That's the one social media that I do. That's just my name, Jules Boykoff. And yeah, you can always reach out to me via email and continue the conversation that way. But yeah, thank you.
It's my pleasure, Jules. Take care.
All right, you too.
All right.